So good morning. We're going to look today at the golden ages of the Netherlands. And that title, in fact, corresponds to the 17th century when most of the great architecture and the expansion of the city happened. But it was extremely influential. So what we see here is kind of a brief history of the Netherlands and show how at the time the territories were part of the Duchy of Burgundy, of the territories of Burgundy. And so the Netherlands is what is north of this line here. Here is Belgium, and these are territories that used to be part of the Low Countries, but were taken by Louis XIV later on. Part of this went back to France after the death of Charles, and this part went to Switzerland. So this is more or less how the Low Countries existed during the 100 Years of War. And here we have the 80 Years of War, sorry, not the 100. So here we have Belgium in green with the bishopric of Liège, which was independent, and then all the other provinces here in the north, where what is now the Netherlands, were considered the Low Countries legally until 1648 at the treaty, where the Netherlands, the Northern Republic of the Netherlands, was recognized officially by Spain. But it had done de facto already since 1585. So here is the way the Reformation happened after 1517, and I hope it's going to move. I don't know. I thought it was an interactive map, but it is not. So in purple, you see what is Calvinist or Lutheran, depending on the country. And then here you have in blue what is Catholic, and the Orthodox Christianity in that orange, dark orange, and the rest is Islam. So where there was more of the Protestant invasion, if you want, in France, for example, during the War of Religion, we had many regions that had turned almost entirely Protestant, but it was pushed back. And so you have, first of all, a large quantity of Reformed people, and then it's going to shrink again. So the Netherlands is going to be to really see its expansion with two companies. The company of the Dutch East India Company, and that was founded in 1602 and was active until 1799. The Netherlands is going to become an enormously successful maritime country. And so this one, for example, that was actually the first corporation to ever actually listed on an official stock exchange. So it goes back all the way there. But it granted a 21-year monopoly on the Dutch spice trade. It was very influential in the rise of corporate-led globalization. You see already then a global economy, and possessed almost as much power as the government. Let me let these people in. So it could wage war, it could imprison and execute convicts, it could negotiate treaties, strike its own coins, and establish colonies. And these colonies include Indonesia, the Indian subcontinent, Japan, Taiwan, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, the Mauritius Island, and South Africa. The other company is the Dutch West India Company. And you see the building in Amsterdam, that was the administrative building of those. And that one was founded in 1621 and was active until 1792. So this one was given jurisdiction over the Dutch participation in the Atlantic slave trade. It was very active in West Africa between the Tropic of Cancer and the Cape of Good Hope, and in the Americas. In Brazil, they at the time owned the northern part of Brazil and were trying to be recognized as the owner of the whole country, the Caribbean islands and North America, and then also including the Pacific Oceans and the eastern part of New Guinea. So as you can see, they were covering almost the entire world. And their role with all the fleet was to just go around, establish counters, establish trade posts, and then keep defending these places. So they would have some citizens going there and defending these trade posts. As you know, they also are the one that founded the new Amsterdam, the new Netherlands, actually, at the point of Manhattan. And so here you see at the time the territory that began in 1624 with the founding of a Dutch fur trading settlement on what was called at that time the Governor's Island. Construction was started in 1625 of a citadel of Fort Amsterdam on the Manhattan Island that was later called Nieuw Amsterdam in Flemish, and which is now the lower Amsterdam, and with this line here being Wall Street. This is the wall that was built to protect the colonies from the Indians. So on May 24, 1626, the Dutch colonists acquired Manhattan from an unnamed Native American people who are believed to have been the Carnacy Indian, in exchange for trade goods worth about 60 guilders, often said to be worth about $24. In 1647, Peter Stuyvesant was appointed as the last Dutch Director General of the colony. And then New Amsterdam was formally incorporated as a city in 1653. In 1664, the English conquered the New Netherlands and renamed it New York, after the Duke of York and Albany. Here are some of the Dutch conquests in the West Indies. So you see all the names, they're very familiar in the northern part of South America with Bahia, Recife, Paraíba, São Luís do Maranhão, and Paramaribo. So, and here you have also the islands. This one of Saint Martin, this here of Saint Martin. As you know, they own half of Saint Martin Island. And the one here is Curaçao, Bonaire, and Aruba. The primary Dutch and Portuguese settlement in Asia were here in orange, the Dutch that were fighting very hard against the Portuguese to try to conquer many of the trading posts. Only Goa and Macau resisted, but all the others were taken by the Dutch. Which gives us a map that shows you what is now the contemporary countries and federated states which were significantly colonized by the Dutch. And they're now called by the Dutch kindred countries. And in blue, the dark blue, you see the Netherlands, and it's interesting to see the quantity of countries and territories that still had particular links with them. This is a map of the Dutch colonial empire during the 17th and 18th century. In light green, the Dutch East India Company. In dark green, the Dutch West India Company. And in yellow, the territories that were occupied later after they were. So you can see it's still quite a large quantity. Just a list here of the colonies. You had in 1602, the beginning of the Dutch-Portuguese War, where you had that constant battle between the two colonial countries that were really trying to win that war of trading post. Between 1637 and 61, the Dutch claimed Brazil, but then it ceased with the Treaty of the Hague. Between 1621 and 64, they had the New Netherlands, and I just told you they were taken by the British. In 1638, they colonized the Mauritius. In 1863, only in 1863, they abolished slavery in the colonies. And in 1945, Indonesia declared its independence, but remains a very close contact with the Dutch. So they have privileged exchanges between the two countries. 1954, the Dutch colonies of Suriname and Curaçao and dependencies became countries within the kingdom on the basis of equality. So they treat the same way as other cities or territories in the Netherlands. Suriname declared its independence, though, in 1975. And in 2010, the Netherlands Antilles was dissolved, but on different criteria. They had some votes on each of the islands. And so the countries within the Kingdom of the Netherlands remained Aruba, Curaçao, and Sint Maarten, 40% of the island. Special municipalities of the Netherlands alone, Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Saba. So that gives you a little idea how the colonial period went on. Now, the family tree of the House of Orange, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it starts with William I the Silent, who was actually a prince of Orange. In 1544 became Prince of Orange, the city of Orange in France, by the way. And he was actually a pretty good friend with the King Philip II of Spain, but then was disturbed by what happened is that Philip II wanted to oppress the Low Countries with more taxes and wanted to remove a lot of the privileges that many of the cities enjoyed. And so little by little, William turned around and decided he didn't want it and became de facto the leader of the opposition against Philip II. And so he is going to be the one to lead the northern provinces through the beginning of the split until he was assassinated in 1584 by a Spanish agent. His son, Maurice, became the Prince of Orange between 1567 and 1625. These are no kings, they are stadtholder in English, stadtholder in Netherlands and in Dutch. And so this is an interesting government. Each of the provinces had its own stadtholder, and one would be named a general stadtholder out of all the others, and was in charge, in fact, mostly in charge of the international relationship. But he had that power over the others, mostly for international purposes. So we have Frederick Henry and so on. William II, Prince of Orange, is going to marry Mary, Princess Royal. There will be a very short period without a stadtholder. And then William III, Prince of Orange, is going to marry Mary II of England and will become the famous couple, King of England in 1689, as William and Mary. Then there is another period without stadtholder. The successor is not, doesn't become the stadtholder for the Netherlands, only William IV and William V. Then there is a Batavian Republic, which is still the case at that time, but it's only after 1806 then Napoleon Bonaparte puts his brother as king at the head of the Netherlands for a short period of time, just 4 years. And he's then going to be succeeded by another Prince of Orange, William I, who becomes the first king of the Netherlands. And since then, it has been a kingdom, but not, as you can see, it's a parliamentarian king. The now king is William Alexander of the Netherlands, son of Beatrix. We had for 3 generations, we had women at the head. They don't have a Sally Claw, so women can succeed to men if necessary. Wilhelmina had a very long reign of 82 years, and Juliana, pretty long too. The Netherlands is going to benefit from very illustrious immigrants. One is René Descartes, the philosopher, the mathematician, scientist, and writer. He's been called the father of modern philosophy, and was becoming very uncomfortable in France, so he emigrated to the Netherlands. And it's really very interesting because he was in the Netherlands quite comfortable, and then he was invited by Queen Christina of Sweden to come to Sweden because she wanted him to teach her philosophy. He accepted, and in 1649, which is about the time when Frans Hals painted him there, he went to Sweden in the middle of winter. This is not a gentle climate, and the cart was used to kind of a very personal kind of life where he would get up at 10 o'clock in the morning and work late in the evening. But when he arrived in Sweden, unfortunately, the Queen had a very different schedule. She would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work nonstop, and he was supposed to respond to her request at any time. He didn't survive that very much. He died in 1650, so a year after his arrival, and probably from pneumonia. Another of the very famous immigrants is Baruch Spinoza, very important figure too, philosopher of Portuguese Jewish origin. He was one of the great rationalists of the 17th century philosophy, and especially really laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment and modern biblical criticism. He actually lived very modestly as a lens grinder. And then I don't have to present you John Locke, but John Locke also emigrated to the Netherlands because he felt very uncomfortable in England after some of his controversial writings. And you can imagine, at least Descartes and, no, actually they didn't meet because Locke was younger, but otherwise it would have been an interesting encounter between the two. René Descartes was known for the famous sentence, cogito ergo sum, so if I think, I am. The Netherlands has quite an interesting geography, in the sense that more than half of the country the grounds are below sea level. And you can see the map on the right. Everything that is blue is under sea level. So they had to work very hard to get all the marshy areas or the lakes emptied and recover the ground. And I'm going to show you the kind of techniques they were using. And on the left, you have the map of the Netherlands, what is now. And you can see that these, all that part in blue are very populated and very successful cities such as Rotterdam or Delft or Gouda. Sertogenbosch is just at the limit. You see that Amsterdam would have been underwater too here, Haarlem and Alkmaar, all these would have been underwater. So you have an idea also how the Netherlands looked originally. The technique, the original technique was done with windmills. And these windmills, with the power of the wings, if you want, were pumping the waters. And you can see how it was working here. They were pumping the waters from the marshlands and take it to the next level until it was going to the sea. That work of the windmill has been replaced by pumping station, is the ones you can see in Zoetermeer now. This is a very different technique. But by 1961, literally 6,800 square miles had been reclaimed from the sea. This is what they call the polders. The Dutch often say that God created the world, but the Dutch created the Netherlands. The new royal family is composed of the king and his wife. His wife is Maxima Zorreguieta Cerruti, so she was originally from Argentina. And they have 3 daughters, and it's the eldest daughter that you see here in yellow who will be the heiress to the throne. Their family residence is in the Huis ten Bosch in The Hague, and that you see here on the left. Whereas the official royal palace is in The Hague. Was at first the town hall, and you see it portrayed by Jacob van Kampen. Sorry, this is it's an engraving, but the architect of the town hall was Jacob van Kampen. And you see here the interior with an extraordinary sculptural program, but there are also some paintings in many of the rooms. The sculptor responsible for that program was Artus Quellinus from Antwerp. This is the way the royal palace looks now. And so it has become the royal palace instead of the town hall. By the way, just for those of you that have been to Amsterdam, it's very close to the Red District, which is just behind you when you're looking at it to your right. The architecture, the design of Amsterdam is very interesting because they really take advantage of the water to, instead of having some large streets, they have these canals, and these canals enable them to carry heavy loads in barges and then let them literally at your door. So here you have the whole series. This is done in 1538. An interesting bird's eye view when you know there was no hot air balloon or on any other way to see from high up, but they already have an idea on how it would look from the bird's eye view. what you call here is that series of canals are called the Grachtengordel, which means the belt of canals. Now, Amsterdam is not legally the capital city of the Netherlands, it's The Hague. But according to the Dutch constitution, it is the capital of the Netherlands. Anyhow, despite the fact that the parliament and the Dutch government are in The Hague. So there's a kind of a tension between the two cities. Here is a topographic map of Amsterdam, and here you see the very center with that series of canals that surround the, and make the old town. Since then, as you can see, it has expanded drastically. It is an aerial view. And Mason, be careful, your sound is on and we can hear you. So, as I mentioned, the 17th century was really considered the golden age of the cities. The Amsterdam became one of the wealthiest cities in the world. And there were ships sailing from Amsterdam to the entire world. Just to help you, you can see here, have an idea, the old town, a map of the old town. You can see the Anne Frank's house, the Dam Square, which is where the town hall is. The Singel, this is the name of that canal, Singel. The Herengracht, which is the canal of the men, if you want. The Keizergracht, which is the canal of the emperor. The Prinsengracht, which is the canal of the prince. Then you have the Lijnbaangracht, the line, if you want, the avenue, the Sinkelgracht, that's another canal also. The Rijksmuseum is here, the whole area here, and the Van Gogh Museum is down there. The river Amstel, from which Amsterdam takes its name, runs this way. The Rembrandt's house is over there, and the central station is there. So you have a little idea of the geography of the place. Some of the main monuments of the city are some churches. The Oude Kerk, which means the old church, which was consecrated in 1306, but then was taken over once the Calvinist became the most important religion. They took it from the Catholics and made it a Calvinist church. As you can see, it has a beautiful ceiling that kind of almost like the hull of a ship. The Westerkerk, that was built in 1620 to 31. So that church was built as a Calvinist church. And so this is actually the largest church that was built for Protestants. The only decoration that you can find in the churches there are the organs, and often organs in the Netherlands have these beautiful doors that protect the organ when not in use from the birds and from dust. And so this one, for example, has been decorated by the known Dutch painter Gerard de Leresse, who is from a French family. And so when you open it, you can see that magnificent organ with the painted doors inside, representing the Queen of Sheba visiting King Solomon. And here you can see some detail of these doors. And that's something we often, sometimes you see some of these paintings very narrow and high. They are typically part of old organ doors. You find that mostly in Germany, in the Netherlands, and sometimes and in Italy, too. The Catholic religion was not quite prohibited after the split from the southern Netherlands, but it wasn't encouraged. And so the Catholics were tolerated, but could not worship openly. And so what happened is that the Catholics decided to, in many places, carve into old houses, carve chapels or little church, what we call the clandestine churches, within the houses. So, and this is one of the few that remain. There were up to 20 clandestine churches in Amsterdam at the time. And you can see here, this is the canal. The canal is just running in front of this. And these are two houses back to back that have been used. And within the upper floors, they have literally carved, going through different floors, carved a church. And we'll see some pictures. You have some pictures here, literally with galleries. So here is a picture of that clandestine church. You have the altar. Literally, you have 3 altar pieces that are interchangeable. They can take it down, and depending on the liturgy, are going to use another one. The pulpit is down here. That column that you see, you just rotate it and open it, and it becomes a pulpit. You have the gallery, so it could accommodate enough people. And opposite to the altar is that organ. And I'm really laughing because if they wanted it to be clandestine, don't tell me that people couldn't hear it from the outside. Organ makes a lot of noise. They also, of course, synagogue. The Dutch opened their arms to that whole population that was kicked out of Spain and Portugal, and Spain in 1492, a few years later from Portugal. And they were very welcome in the Netherlands, couldn't reach very high position in the administration, but were able to have commerce and trade and so on, were very successful. And this is the beautiful, what they call the Portuguese synagogue. Why Portuguese is because the Spaniards were their enemy, and so they didn't want to give though there was a majority of Spanish refugees, they gave it the name of Portugal because it was less controversial. Here you see a painting by Emmanuel de Witte, the interior of the Esnoga, the synagogue. As we have seen in many places in Belgium, in the northern Belgium, there was some beguinage, and the same thing in Amsterdam, that the beguinage that was founded in 1346 has all these lovely little homes that were occupied by a few women that were living there to be kind of in a protected environment when they were either widows or decide not to marry. It was difficult for them to live by themselves in the house, and so they would live in that beguinage, in Dutch begijnhof, and they would have some rules, but they were not an order, a religious order. And it is in that beguinage that you can find one of the oldest houses, if not the oldest house, wooden house in Amsterdam. It's called the Het Houten Huis, that was built in 1528. Other interesting monuments, and this one is less known, though the exterior, the architecture is important. It's the Hague. The Hague in Amsterdam used to be that place where goods had to be weighed. And so this is where people had to come with the goods. It had to be weighed and then stamped to be legal, if you want. It is within that building that they had, as you can see, the St. Lucas Guild. So the Guild of St. Lucas is typically for painters. And in a little room that is upstairs, in one of these large towers, they're actually the opposite one, that you can find the anatomical theater where Rembrandt painted the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp that you see here on the left. Now, if you go to Amsterdam, I don't know how it is now because it's about 20 years, more than 20 years I was there. You have to go, this is a cafe. And you have to go to the bartender and give him a little money, a few euros, and ask him if you can go to the anatomical theater. And then he lets you through a very narrow door, and you go up, and there you are in that amazing place where you can see all the coat of arms of the different groups and the different important people that pass some time there. So these are some of the little treasures in Amsterdam. The landscape of Amsterdam is for sure familiar to you. This is the Magere Brug, which is the bridge, the little mager, it's kind of a meager bridge here on the river. And of course, the typical architecture of these houses that go from the Gothic style to the Renaissance, and it's going to change the window, the size of the window is going to be the mark of that change between the Gothic style and the Renaissance, but they all have these very typical facade. And if you look at them from profile, you're going to notice that they're slightly slanting towards the front. And this has a good reason. They have a pulley up here so that when they move, they bring the furniture from the outside, and so that the furniture doesn't bang against the facade. It had to be the facade had to be slightly slanted to the front. They also, on many of the canals or on the Amstel, there are some boat house. A lot of people that live in these houses too. On one of the streets, this is actually the Jodenstraat, so the street of the Jews, is the famous house of Rembrandt. The house has been refurbished, and then they tried to reconstruct the way it looked inside when Rembrandt was living in it. This is the house where he settled in shortly after moving from Leiden to Amsterdam, as he became very quickly successful, and he unfortunately had no sense of budget and money. He spent a lot of money, bought this very nice house there. And as I say, you have the reconstruction of his studio, the collection room. He had a tremendous collection of artifacts, plaster bust, fabrics, and all kinds of objects that he was using as props in his paintings. And then the typical living quarters with these beds that are very short, because people were not sleeping laying down, but they were sleeping almost sitting down. Wow. As you know, he purchased the house in 1639 and then went bankrupt in 1656 when the house was sold. The Hague Museum, as you know, it's an old building, 1885. It has recently been completely refurbished. Of course, in the process of refurbishing it, they discovered that they had a lot of, how do you call it again? You know, the bad material in the roof. And so it took 10 more years than it was originally planning. Asbestos, that's it. They had a lot of asbestos. And so it took a longer time, but I haven't seen it since it has been done. but apparently it's extraordinary. They changed their philosophy of displaying the art. Instead of having just the painting hanging on the wall, they also have a fabulous collection of furniture, Dutch furniture, silvers, of course, ceramics, and so on. And they apparently have now added some of furniture within the rooms, which makes them far less cold. Other museum, you have the Stedelijk Museum of Amsterdam, which is the museum of the city of Amsterdam. And then the Van Gogh Museum, which has also been redone and modernized with Gerrit Rietveld and Kisho Kurokawa as architects. The Stedelijk Museum is dedicated to modern and contemporary art and design. The Dutch are very open to modern architecture. We will see a lot of examples in some cities because it was terribly damaged during the war, or just because they grew so rapidly. So this is the Openbare Bibliotheek and the Conservatorium of Amsterdam. So this is the library of Amsterdam, and next to it the music building, if you want, conservatorium in Dutch. The Red District is very known, and as you know too, the Dutch are very tolerant as far as drugs are concerned, soft drugs. And so don't be surprised if you find cannabis coffee shops, a lot of paraphernalia that is displayed in many shops, mushrooms, all kind of things you can find. And then the red light district, though there are some discussions right now that they might move it out of there because it's so much in the very center of the old city. It's very provocative when you go through the red light district, which sometimes you have to go, for example, to go to the clandestine church, you have to go through the red light district to come to that canal. And though now most of the girls are from the islands, and most of them are dark skinned, and but they're not welcome. If a woman looks at them, they don't like it. So the next city is The Hague, and The Hague is then the administrative center, if you want, of the Netherlands. In Dutch, it's called Den Haag. Here is the Hoofdvijver, so it's that big, large pond, and all the buildings that are housing the States General of the Netherlands that were built in the 17th century. It's a beautiful view. Across from them are a whole series of 18th century houses that were inhabited by some of the most important people in The Hague. Within these buildings, the walls of the building is the Gothic Ridderzaal, which is the Knights Hall that was built in the 13th century. Sorry, I'm getting not what I wanted to do, so sorry. There we are, okay. And this is, it houses the meeting place for both houses of the States General of the Netherlands, as well as the Ministry of General Affairs. The old city hall, the Groenmarkt, as you can see, was turned too small very quickly. It was built in 1564, replaced the Count Castle, and has a historical picture gallery within now. It has been replaced in 1986 by the Hague City Hall, the IJs Paleis, because IJs is ice in Dutch, and because of its white color. And you can guess very quickly that is Richard Meyer, who was the architect, the same as the one who designed the museum in Santa Monica of, oh gosh, I'm blanking out today, the Getty Museum in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
One of the most beautiful buildings in The Hague is the Mauritshuis. Mauritshuis, not by one of the stadhouder, but a cousin, had that beautiful building built in 1636 to 41 by the very famous Dutch architects Jacob van Campen and Peter Post. You see another view of the Mauritshuis. In one side, it is surrounded by water, and in the background, you can see the ultra-modern towers that are making the center of The Hague. Mauritshuis is, of course, that extraordinary museum. It contains so many treasures, including The Girl with the Pearl of Vermeer, the view of Delft by Vermeer, many Rembrandt's paintings and other famous paintings. But it's just a jewel in itself, just the architecture outside as well as inside. It's absolutely stunning. The city endured a lot of damage during the World War II. Many Jews were killed during the German occupation, and the Atlantic Wall was built through the city, causing a large part of the neighborhood to be torn down by the Nazi occupants. And so also on the 3rd of March, 1945, the Royal Air Force mistakenly bombed part of the quarter of The Hague mistakenly. They were targeting actually V2 rockets nearby, but they made some navigational errors, and the bomb fell on a heavily populated and historic part of the city, caused 511 fatalities and a lot of physical damage, as you can imagine. So this is, and you heard of the International Criminal Court. These are the facilities that house that International Criminal Court. The next largest city is Rotterdam. It's a major logistic and economic center. It's now the largest port in Europe, has a population of over 600,000 people. It is the second largest population in the Netherlands, just after Amsterdam. Here you see an old map of it dating 1652, where you see that also they take advantage of some canals and rivers that are patterned in certain way that it makes the transport of heavy objects very easy. Here is a satellite image of Rotterdam and its port. And you can see this is actually very difficult when you look at the map of the Netherlands, that you have a huge, actually that whole part of the Netherlands is a huge delta of the Meuse and the Rhine River that almost intersect. And they create canals in between. And so you have both the Rhine River and the Meuse are ending in the North Sea, as you can see. This makes, because not only the country is, a lot of it is below sea level, but because of the tides and sometimes, and for sure, what's happening now with the warming up of the planet, so the melting of the ice, the level of the sea is high. And so they made some really interesting contraction that prevents the flow to go inland and flood the inland. So we're going to see that in a minute. And here is what they call the storm surge barrier. And unfortunately, I didn't do it properly, but you can see when these are open and then they can be mechanically closed and prevent the water to flood the inland. This is a similar system that is being used in Venice. Everybody around the world is looking at what the Dutch have done. Um, Rotterdam was awfully bombed. The German made an example with the city to try to impress on the rest of the population. And so, as you can see here, after the 1940 bombing of Amsterdam, there was almost nothing left. Hitler was hoping to conquer the country in just one day, but they in fact encountered the very fierce resistance from the population. And so it's after that bombing that the Dutch were forced to capitulate on the 15th of May, 1940. 80,000 civilians were made homeless and 900 were killed. And it's a miracle that not more were killed. When you see this, they apparently had the time to flee the city before the bomb fell down. So this is the way it would have looked with the church there, and this is what was left after the war. So the result of that is that the center of Rotterdam is a very modern city, has some interesting bridges, as you know, the ships have to come in. So we have a very large bridge here. This is one, that bridge over here, that is nicknamed the Swan. It was designed by Ben van Berkel and completed in 1996. And so you have one part of the bridge that stays, this one, and the other part, as you can see here, raises to let the ships through. The Markthal, the market hall. This is a residential and office building with the market hall underneath. This was opened in 2014. This is seen in the windows of one of the buildings, the Rotterdam Library on the left, and the Black Tower on the right. And then you see on the side there what is called the cube houses. It's a series. In the 60s, the Dutch gave a lot of support to young architects and allowed them to make some quite extravagant trials on typically apartments or little houses, and we'll see a few. Here are these cube houses that were built in 2011 by Piet Blom. And you can see the interior of these. So you access it through these pods if you want. And then you come up. You have, of course, some solar energy. And here's the way the inside looks. These are quite interesting. We'll see some others in 's-Hertogenbosch that are based on similar principle, if you want. The central station is also by a young, actually a group of architects, the Bentham Cowell Architecten, and Meijer and Van Schoten architects. This is the central station that was built in 2000, open at least, in 2014. Leiden is a very interesting city. It's actually the first university city that was given the privilege of becoming a university town because they had defended themselves so strongly against the Spaniards. And so they were given a choice between either getting a whole subsidy, if you want, from the stadtholder, or get a university. And they very wisely chose the university, which is still the most important university in the Netherlands. It is in Leiden that Rembrandt was born. His parents had a mill at this corner, And you can see it here. This was the place where he was born and where his parents. Here's the birth house of Rembrandt, the mill that belonged to his father, and part of the buildings. Of course, these are the old buildings of Leiden University. And in the winter, as you can see. And this is I mean, at that time, it was mostly based on theology, mathematics, philosophy, etc., but has become a altogether very round university. The town hall and the bridge. Here you see the tower of the town hall. Of course, you always have that network of canals. It's part of the culture. And the church, St. Peter's Kerk in Leiden. St. Peter's Kerk has a very interesting story in the fact that, first of all, it was almost completely destroyed during the iconoclast storm, that the groups of people that came in the 16th century, but also was partly blown up by a gunpowder explosion in 1807. It used to have a large tower, but that one was destroyed, and they didn't rebuild it. It is where here that the pilgrims that were later on their way to the United States initially settled. They actually settled first in Amsterdam, and then were kind of pushed back and went to Leiden. They were considered a congregation of separatists, and this is where in 1609 Robinson and about 100 followers petitioned the city of Leiden for permission to resettle there by 1st of May 1609. And this is how it became the Dutch Moving Day. It is actually where Robinson is buried, and you can see the plaque celebrating his life. Other typical images of Leiden with the canal and the rivers. Delft, of course, you all know about the ceramic of Delft. And let's say, this is a good time probably to take an intermission. Let me, we will chat on that. So you can unmute yourself if you want to talk, if you have questions. I see no chat. So unmute yourself if you want and let me know if you have questions.
And when I visited the Netherlands, Amsterdam, it was full of bicycles, and you have, you have to be very careful. So
they have priority above anyone, even pedestrians. Yes, it's very much part of the culture. And when I did some seminars at the Rijksmuseum, and it was funny because you would have the director of the museum coming in the morning on his bike, and with he had all his files on the back of the bicycle. It's very interesting. It's very flat, so you don't have relief. That's why it's called the Low Countries. You don't have relief, so it's quite appropriate for bikes, even for people that are of a certain age. You see, they hold in good shape because they go on bike.
So Anne, this is Steve. I mean, our son lives there, and our Dutch daughter, who is an attorney, when she got her first job 5 years ago, one of the things the law firm did was gave her a very nice bicycle for commuting.
Yeah. No, it's very typical. They do it since the kids, and the traffic is done in such a way that, as I say, the bike have priority over cars, And
Right.
typically, as you said, Jan, you better be careful as a pedestrian because you don't,
Yeah.
for us that are not used to it, we don't have that side vision that is sensitized by bikes. And so we have a tendency to go in front. So you have to be very careful over there. But it's, I mean, it's thousands of bikes at any, you know, close to the, if you go to the station, for example.
Yeah.
There are
Multi-story
rows
parking
and
garage.
rows of bikes, and you wonder, how do they find theirs? You know, it's quite amazing because they have to have a really good sense where their bike is.
On the third floor. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but they have a character which is really interesting because you feel so much from the beginning that they fought so much for what they have. That there is that kind of very stubborn, very entrepreneurial type of character. It's a very small country, but it's one of the largest powers in a sense in the world. And you would be surprised that I think it's the third or fourth trade partner with the US. And you wouldn't believe it because the country is so small, but they have branches everywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful.
They spent a lot of money on the Delta project.
Yes.
They used their natural gas resources to pay for a lot of it.
Uh-huh. The Delta project is paramount because if they let, you know, with the water, the level of the sea that's going up, the first storm that comes and they will be flooded. And I remember being a young girl when they had that horrible flood in the 50s in the Netherlands that killed thousands of people. And that's when the whole protection against the sea, they just broke up and it flooded the whole part of the country. It was horrible. And so they've been extremely vigilant to do that. And I tell you, the US is looking at it. Venice has been looking at it. There are lots of places in Germany that are looking at it and copying what the Dutch have done. They very much at the cutting edge of many things. As you can see in architecture, I don't think I've seen many cities that have such avant-garde architecture as they do in the Netherlands. And of course, it's a very highly populated country. The density, it's I think the eighth highest density in the world. So
wow.
Belgium is closely behind, but Belgium is a little less because they have the southern part of Belgium that is less populated because of the relief.
But when you get out of Amsterdam and you go, you know, north and east, I mean, it's very rural. I mean, it's not.
It's very rural, but you never have, like here, for example, these where you can drive for miles without seeing anything. There, you know, as soon as you come out of Amsterdam, you have the next village, and then the next village.
Yeah, and farms. Yeah,
it's farms and so on. It's very much so.
And
yes,
and many of the people also, they were very tall.
Yes, you touch a good point. It's one of the tallest population in the world. They average 6'2".
Yeah.
right. I have a good joke for that. When you land at Schiphol and you've been flying for a while and you have to go to the restroom, it's have to stand on tippy toes, you know, to be able to reach. And I'm 5'9", but I wonder. I mean, it is a good joke, you know.
Yeah.
So average 6'2", women too. And what is interesting, and we'll talk about it at the end, the population, the immigrant population, is taller than the original, the people of you know, the original country. So there must be something in the air or in the food that they, you know what, and they consume a lot of dairy, and so people are really wondering why they're so tall and why the immigrants that live there become taller than others.
Yeah.
it's quite interesting. No, I agree with you, Steve. You go there and you feel dwarfed.
Yeah, it is sort of funny, and that helps on the set plays for the Dutch national football team, right? In the soccer, to put a header in helps, you know. So.
Yeah. I know that.
Anne, I have
Yes.
a question. You said the beds are small because they're sitting up. Is that they're afraid they're
That's everywhere.
going to be?
That's the way people were sleeping.
Yeah.
Not only in the Netherlands, but in France, in Germany, or whatever. You had these beds, you know, closed by curtains to avoid the draft. But people were sleeping 1, 2, 3, 4 in the same bed, but they would have people sleeping 1 or 2 on one side, 1 or 2 on the other side. But they were sitting down. It was considered unhealthy to lay down. Because they couldn't breathe as well or whatever. So they were, you know, you see in the old movies, you see always tons of cushions, pillows behind.
Yes.
That's the way they were sleeping.
Oh, thank you.
So the beds are much shorter than what you would see now. I mean, for that reason.
Anne?
Yes.
In Thomas Jefferson's house where they show his bed, I don't know how many slept in it. Well, we know a few, but it was really
sleeping. I'm not sure.
But it was really short also because
but that's typical.
Colonists.
That's very typical.
Yeah.
It's really in the 19th century they started changing. Okay. I think we're going to go back. I'm going to mute you all again and then we'll talk at the end. Okay, so moving to Delft, the lovely city. All these cities have, you know, their character, and it's quite interesting. Delft comes from delven, which means digging. And so the word comes from the fact that they dug a canal next to a settlement, if you want. It was a small village in the Middle Ages and developed as a city only in the 13th century. I don't know if anybody of you has seen The Girl with the Pearl, the movie, because it gives actually a pretty good image of what that looked like, and the fact again of that network of canals that were used as transportation much more than the streets, because the streets were dirty. And so transportation was much easier through the canal like this. Though, I don't know if you're aware, but The Girl with the Pearl was actually filmed in the Luxembourg, where they have studios with ponds and canals, fake canals. So quite interesting. The center of the city is that very large square on which you have on one side the Delft City Hall, and on the other side the old church that we'll see. Beautiful image. You can see the small houses all along with the terraces. Here's the City Hall during the day. Very typical. Often it is designed by Peter Post or Van Kampen, the two major architects of the time, and they all look more or less the same. Opposite to it is the Oude Kerk, the St. Bartholomew Church. It was founded as a Catholic church in 1246 and then became a Protestant church later on. This is the interior, very typically Calvinist with whitewashed walls. So they removed any painting that could be there, removed any hanging paintings except for the memento moris. You see a large organ at the back, and the beautiful wooden roof. This is the new church. This is the church. It's opposite to the town hall, Church of St. Ursula. That was again a Catholic church to start with, and has become a Protestant church. It is in that church that there is the very large monument of William the Silent that was buried there in 1621. He was buried there in 1621 when it was achieved. As you know, he was assassinated in Delft, actually. That monument appears on many of the Dutch paintings. Here you can see the one by De Witt. It's a beautiful monument here. And then he had the court of the prince not far from it. It's the place actually with the garden, the Prinsenhof, so the garden of the prince. This served as a residence for William the Silent, and this is where he was murdered in 1584. Here are actually the holes of the bullets from the murder. Still, you can see when going into the place. And here is a painting of William the Silent. He was, in French, we call Guillaume le Taciturne. He wasn't speaking easily. He was a rather dark and stout person. Other beautiful images of Delft, the Oude Langendijk, very typical, again in the winter, and all these gates. You find that in many places, the gates with the bridge that goes out over the canal. It is in Delft that they had an industry of ceramics, but they tried, they were importing a lot of Chinese porcelain, so they tried to mimic the Chinese porcelain and doing it with tiles and then with vessels. So here you can see, for example, some polychrome patterns, a multicolor pattern of the tiles that were made in the 16th century, and that's going to evolve with figurative decors, so little animals or little figures, children, and the combination of many. And then between 1640 and 80, they started to imitate the Chinese porcelain. That was at that time a porcelain that was imported from China, but through the southern part of Africa. And they were contouring the whole continent down there. And because the currents were so bad, a lot of ships would sink. These were typically Portuguese ships that were at first transporting that. And the name of these ships were crack. And so they called it the crack porcelain. That were the typical patterns from Chinese porcelain. And after the death of the Wanli Emperor in 1620, then they really started copying. These were, by the way, tulip vases. So here you see some motifs that were imported from Chinese porcelain. So when they, for different reasons, they were normally not using tiles on the floor. We have to keep in mind that tile floors are very slippery, that's one thing, but also the cold. And with the humidity that is constant in the Netherlands, it's a very rainy country. So the cold and the humidity, you have that condensation on the tiles, which makes it really dangerous. So contrary to what you see often in paintings, the tiles in paintings were actually used as a design to help the painters getting a sense of perspective. But most of the time, the tiles were used on the walls or around chimneys, because there they were reacting very well to the temperature. So here you have that beautiful chimney of the Zaan region with the scenes of the Bible. That's the flight into Egypt. And then you start seeing an evolution in the second half of the 17th century. The techniques get much more sophisticated, and you have these beautiful examples with Griffith and some people with elaborate dresses, and then ships with the sails. So moving from Delft, so Delft, we never have porcelain there, it's ceramic, just keep that in mind. The next very interesting city is Haarlem. Haarlem, which is west of Amsterdam, a little northwest of Amsterdam, has a long history, and it's actually the neighborhood of Haarlem in New York takes its name from there. It is a city that housed a lot of immigrants when Philip II gave 5 years to people in Antwerp, for example, to either reconvert to Catholicism or to leave. A great amount of people that left Antwerp and its neighborhood went to Haarlem. Haarlem had a great school of painters. They big names, particularly of painters that were doing still lifes, like Peter Klaas or Willem Klaas Heda, were all from Haarlem. Here's the city hall, and at the very celebrated Sint Bavo church. It's a beautiful, of course, built as a cathedral. Has extraordinary organ, but you cannot enter when there is an office. Here you are, pipe organ too, without doors. And then on the left you have Koster, Laurens Jans Koster, who according to the Dutch is believed to have invented the printing process, not Gutenberg. So there is a big tension between Gutenberg and Laurens Jans Koster. Unfortunately, we have no example of his printing, but he's still believed to be in the Netherlands as the original inventor of the printing press. The Vleeshal, which is the butcher hall, it's an original building from 1603. This was the guild house for the butchers. With the head of a bull, as you can see there. And then in one lovely little street is the poor man's house. And the importance of the poor man's house is it was the collection of small houses that made what was called the oude mannenhuis, the old man's almshouse, where the elderly men that had no revenue were housed, almost everything paid by the city. They had to be probably two each in each of these little houses. They were required to bring their own household goods, listed as a bed, a chair with a cushion, a tin chamber pot, 3 blankets, 6 good shirts, and 6 nightcaps. They were locked in each night at 8 o'clock in the summer and 7 in the winter. And then the residents had to make a weekly collection with a poor box. So it was very regimented, and there was literally a board that would organize this and make sure that everything was running right. This is now the beautiful Frans Hals Museum, and has a collection of his big militia paintings as well as others. There are other painters there too, including some doll houses. It's a beautiful museum. Another museum is in Haarlem is the Tylers Museum. Very interesting. It's a building that belonged to a collector. And you see on the right, the library with on the bottom a whole display of his collections of almost everything. It has collections of shells, precious shells, and coins and all small objects. It has also rooms with collections of engravings. It's very interesting. And then the river Spaan through Haarlem. The gate towards Amsterdam, and one of the windmills, of course, that is that kind of landmark all around the Netherlands, and were used as a very important, it was a very important technical building, because you could do everything from grinding pigments as far as the painters were concerned, but cerals and stones and all kinds of things. Hoorn is a small town north of Amsterdam in the Fries. It's a very old building here. The West Frisian Museum is really lovely with different collections. Little collections of even costumes and dresses, but also paintings and everyday objects. It's a absolutely charming town. It is in Hoorn that Willem Kaef finished his life. We had the head tower along the canal and the port. And there you can see how slanted the facades are. Zaandam is almost a museum town. They moved a whole series of mills, and of which one is in working condition. And they also moved a whole series of old houses there. So it's almost like a museum town. You can go there and see a little bit how they were living. You can visit the houses. Here is the Zaanse Schans that is doing the grinding of pigments. And when you go there, you can buy pigments of different colors, and you can see the wheels. Here you have an idea of the wheel here turning and grinding all these pigments, and then they come in big barrels, and then they make little jars of little pots, and you can buy these original pigments from the Zaanse Schans. There you can see the raw stones. It is, as you know, the Czar Peter went and visited the Netherlands and was fascinated by the way they were building ships, learned a lot while he was there. And this is the reconstructed house in which the Czar Peter lived. He resided there in 1697. Keukenhof is another beautiful place. This is also west of Amsterdam, but a little south. And if you go at the right time in May, typically, it is a place where all the growers, tulip growers and bulb growers, let's put in general, make really how can I say, they use all their new bulbs and all the new hybrids, because as you know, tulips are easily come as hybrids, and so come with particular colors. And so not only do they have tulips with hyacinths and all the different plants that come in bulbs, and it's a display, it's miles of walking among beautiful flowers. Here is an example of what they do. And it's really almost a contest between the different growers. Tulips, as you know, came to the Netherlands actually via Germany. It started in 1593 when Charles de Lecluze first bred tulips that were, first of all, able to tolerate the harsher condition of the Low Countries. Originally, they come from Turkey, and most probably came to Turkey from Persia. It is an ambassador, Auger de Busbecq, who transported from Turkey the first, from Constantinople actually, the first bulbs of tulips. And then it went through exchange between some German botanists with some Dutch ones, and it became an explosion of culture. The variegated colors you see here were the most precious, and these actually are caused by a virus that are very tulip specific, but it really brings some of these beautiful patterns and colors. This is what they call a watercolor naar het leven, which means after reality, after life portrait, if you want. This was caricaturized in many of the engravings. Here you have Floras Malewaar, and so it's the crazy cart of the flowers, and you see here Flora carrying some bulbs of tulips, and then all kind of terrible figureheads around them. The trade of tulip bulbs became so insane that a lot of people lost their entire fortune, literally speculating on how the ships that were bringing in the bulbs were going to do, and if they were sinking, they would lose everything. But the idea of you could buy with one good bulb, you could literally buy a ship with the cost of one of these bulbs, a whole series of cattle and so on. So it was really insane. And Rembrandt is known to have lost most of his money through speculation on flower bulbs. Anyhow, it made a lot of the culture in the Netherlands, and when you go at the right time, it's that extraordinary landscape that is scattered with all these beautiful tulips with different colors. So for the cost of a single tulip bulb, you could buy 4 oxen, or 12 sheep, or 24 tons of wheat, 4 barrels of beer, a silver drinking cup, and sometimes a ship, depending on the value of the bulb. Thinking cheese, because this is also what Holland is about, is cheese. So we go to Gouda. The city was really flourished after 1100. It was originally a swamp, and again, it is through the drying of the land that they were able to make these places livable. This became a very important market, and you can see in the center there the city hall in the very center, and then the beautiful church of Sint Janskerk, so St. John, one of the rare church, by the way, that kept its stained glass windows, because the same way as for paintings and sculpture, in Calvinist church, everything was removed, but the population revolted against the idea to remove the beautiful stained glass windows that existed in that church, and so they were kept. Here is the lovely town hall. And then the way the market works for the cheese. So if you want to buy a reel of cheese, this is where it is. It's brought in by sometimes with horses. So very picturesque. It is also known, Gouda is also known for the fabrication of candles, smoking pipes, and stroop waffles. Also a linen industry in Gouda. This is a typical view of the canal in Gouda. Alkmaar is another city, the cheese city. This is the cheese market and the weighing house. So the same as the Hague that we saw in Amsterdam. So this is where they had to go and weigh all the produces and products that were coming. In the north, northeast of the Netherlands is a region, the Drenthe, which was in the 17th century a very scarcely populated place, and it's a colder place. It's a really different, and this is a beautiful, very typical farm of the Drenthe. And the language is different. The accent is quite different. The more north you go to Friesland and so on, the accent is different, and I assume it's some influence from the Danes. Moving back south, we go to the important city of Utrecht in the province of Utrecht. Here is an old map, and you see again that network of canals. Utrecht was an extremely influential seat of power, particularly for the Roman Catholic Church. The archbishops of Utrecht were based there, and it was just at the separation of the Carolingian Empire that it was separated in 3 parts. So played quite a role at the time, and it remained even after the splitting of the northern provinces from the south. Utrecht remained a Catholic center in the Netherlands. And therefore, it's also where you have a school of painting that still made some religious paintings, to the contrary of most of the rest of the Netherlands. Here is an image that shows the panorama of Utrecht with the dome. They have that very large St. Martin Church in the center that was built in the early 14th century, but they never finished the nave. What is interesting, though, is that in 1674, a tornado destroyed part of the cathedral, part of the nave, not the, what is interesting, not the tower, and separated the tower from the rest of the nave. They never rebuilt that part. And so it has that really strange and beautiful tower that stands kind of alone, and then a nave alone on the other side. You can see that part that was supposed, this is the transept, but the part of the nave that was supposed to connect to the front tower was never rebuilt. It is in St. Martin's Church that is that retable that is used very often as an example of the iconoclasm that rigged that whole part of the world in the 16th century. And you can see how they would do. This was a retable, so it's in low relief against the wall. They decapitated all the figures. The center of Utrecht is very picturesque. There are some multiple museums. This is on the left, the Catherine convent, which has a collection of early 16th and 17th century paintings, including what is believed to be the first painting made by Rembrandt. But otherwise also paintings of what they call the Masters of Light, which is that whole series of painters from Utrecht that painted these very glowing pictures in the 17th century. Also the Museum of Speelklok, which are these mechanical clocks and organs, as you can see. Also a castle, the Hague castle, that you can see there, that was restored in 1892 by the Rothschild family into that neo-Gothic extravagant building. Beautiful inside with a tremendous detailing, but it's not an original stronghold. It's built on top of an original stronghold. Also very different to what we just saw is the house by Gerrit Rietveld. The Rietveld-Schröder house was built in 1924. And this is part of the style architecture. The group that was associated with Piet Mondrian. And so you can see there in 3D what Mondrian would have done on 2Ds on a canvas. Interesting plan. Actually, the Schröder never really liked the house, so it was sold very quickly. Sertogenbos, this is a difficult name to pronounce, but it means the forest of the dukes, is a beautiful city. And this is where Hieronymus Bosch was born and lived his entire life. It is in that beautiful town that he did. And there was a fire, big fire when he was young that engulfed the city. And it's probably was one of the inspiration for many of his hellish representation. The city was flourishing in the 16th century, had the second largest population in the territory after Utrecht. The town hall, very typical Dutch town hall, and then the Sint-Jan's Cathedral. Very interesting modern architecture. This is the Paleiskwartier with some apartment buildings there, and this is an administration building. At the back. And it is here too that we have this great experiment of young architects that made what is called the bolwoningen, so the bowl houses. And in the middle, it's really interesting because you have the very typical Dutch house, small Dutch house, one family homes. And then suddenly in that park with rather wild vegetation around, you have like little mushrooms, white mushrooms that are growing there and are actually houses. And you can see the interior of one of them. They have open plans, so nothing is closed, but as you can guess on the image of the interior here, you would have bedrooms would be up there. Kind of funny. But these were literally experiments. They never went on doing it. Now, really the southernmost part of the Netherlands is the city of Maastricht, which was added to the Netherlands in 1815 after the Napoleonic War. It's a very old city. It was also very Catholic and remains a Catholic city. also very interesting, was just next to the German border. So they found a lot of resistance during the war. They have some quarries in the surrounding of Maastricht that had enormous, was like a maze of corridors where a lot of people found refuge during the war. Here is a view of the city with the old bridge of the 13th century, part of the bridge, because this is where they elevate the bridge to let the ships through. The town hall, very typical. It's a very young city in many ways. Has two big churches, the Basilica of Saint Servatius, with a 12th century, the hall of the emperor in the westwork of the basilica, and has been whitewashed inside. It's though still a Catholic church. Has great treasury. Beautiful objects. This is in the whole area where they were doing beautiful objects with copper and brass. The other great church, and very typical of the what they call the Mosen style, where you have the westwork and these two towers with that very elevated building in between that is holding it. It's very typical in Germany too. The apse is beautiful with the Romanesque. This is one of the oldest Romanesque church in the Netherlands. This is reminiscent of Aachen, by the way, the emperor's chapel. Great gates all around in the old walls of the city. And then an interesting museum, it's called the Bonifante Museum, where they have a pretty good collection of sculptures and paintings, but they also have all around the Bonifante Museum, they have some laboratories where they restore paintings and study the restoration of paintings. So study the pigments and how the paintings are made. And I had the seminar in these facilities. It was quite stunning. Bonifante is actually derived from the French bons enfants, good children. There was a convent prior to this museum. And then more of the modern architecture. These are the provincial government buildings in Maastricht. Now, away from everything is a absolutely extraordinary museum. Sorry, you see. Is the Colonial Museum. This is in a national park in Otterlo. This is in the southeastern part of the Netherlands. And it's a museum that contains the collection that was founded by the art collector Hélène Köhler-Müller that opened in 1938, and contains actually the second largest collection of Van Gogh paintings after the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. There is also a very large sculpture garden, but doesn't have only paintings from Van Gogh, including, by the way, the Potato Eaters and Café Terrace at Night. I mean, some of the most important paintings by Van Gogh, but also has painting by Mondrian, Seurat, Rodin, Braque, Gauguin, older ones too by Cranach, and some Picasso and some sculpture. It's quite an interesting place, but you really have to go for there. There is no city around at all. So as I do typically with these things, we're going to end up with some Dutch specialties. And when you talk about Dutch, you have to agree that, you know, you're going to have seafood. And one of the biggest specialty in the Netherlands is the soused herring. It's a raw herring soaked in a mild preserving liquid or in a mild vinegar pickle. As well as vinegar, the marinade might contain cider, wine or tea, sugar, herbs, spices, and chopped onion. The herrings are extremely important in the culture in the Netherlands. When the fresh herring comes up, it's almost like a miracle. Everybody is happy and they're going to have their fresh young herrings. Another specialty is the karnemelk. It's buttermilk. And often if you go to a conference or whatever in the Netherlands, you're going to have be greeted with buttermilk, glasses of buttermilk. And it's slightly sour, but very refreshing. As we mentioned before, they are the tallest people in the world. They 6'1" or 2 inches. I bet you that since this statistically, and it's 6'2" as average. And what is really interesting is that it looks like it's contagious, as immigrants living in the Netherlands are taller on average than their racial groups in their countries of origin. Something coming from their connections with Indonesia, and it's absolutely wonderful, is the Indonesian food. You find Indonesian restaurants everywhere. And my favorite is the rijsttafel, which is an elaborate meal adapted by the Dutch, but following the Hidang presentation of the nasi Padang from the Padang region of West Sumatra. And you have that endless series of dishes that are all different, and you can all taste a little bit. This is my very favorite moment. I'm a buffet person, not a big plate person. So I hope you have enjoyed this. As I mentioned, I don't have a slide to show it to you, but the next presentation will be on Normandy on August 11. You will get the reminder anyway. Let me stop the recording.